Hey everyone, this is David. I know you're used to hearing me jump into lesson plans and share what I'm doing right now in my classroom, but this week I wanted to try something different. I'm pulling an episode out of the podcast archives to share an interview I did in 2018. That spring, I interviewed 10 different people to ask them about their experiences with Orff Schulwerk and to help get a better perspective of what Orff Schulwerk is, what it isn't, pedagogy, teaching ideas, what you can expect should you decide to do Orff Levels training, why you should visit a local Orff chapter, and lots more. These interviews were so fun and fascinating, and I wanted to share them again with y'all. Thanks so much for listening. Here's the show. Hey everyone, welcome to episode 31 of Make Moments Matter, a music education podcast, where I share lesson ideas, songs, games, and inspiring things for your elementary music classroom. My name is David Rao, and I am the music teacher who blogs at makemomentsmatter.org. You can also find my ideas on Facebook, Pinterest, Instagram, Twitter, and a variety of other platforms when you search my name or Make Moments Matter. Normally on this podcast, I spend the episode sharing teaching tips, lesson ideas, tricks for classroom management, and a whole host of other topics. For the past several weeks, I've been doing something a little different. In these episodes, I've taken some time away from the normal routine to conduct a series of interviews with music teachers from around the country. I've wanted to take a little time to really think and talk about Orff Schulwerk, what it is, what it isn't, pedagogy, teaching ideas, and what you can expect should you decide to do training or join a local Orff chapter, and more. Maybe you've been to a workshop at a local Orff chapter or have seen a presenter at your state conference who's trained in Orff Schulwerk. These sorts of experiences are great, but definitely don't give you the full picture. I wanted more people to know about the ins and outs of the Orff approach, how to utilize the pitch percussion instruments that are so often associated with Orff Schulwerk, ideas about teaching recorder, movement, resources, and a whole lot more. Throughout this series of conversations, I've been talking with leaders in the world of Orff Schulwerk and people who have lived with this teaching approach. If you've missed the last several episodes, you'll definitely want to go back and hear the other conversations in this series. So far, I've shared 8 interviews with Orff Schulwerk practitioners from around the country. In each of those conversations, we cover a variety of Orff Schulwerk related topics, from recorder to pitch percussion, lesson scaffolding, movement, online resources, ukulele, and a lot more. In this episode, I get a chance to talk with Andrew Ellingsen. Andrew teaches elementary music and works as an instructional coach in Decorah, Iowa. He earned his Bachelor of Arts at Luther College and his Master of Arts in Music Education at the University of St. Thomas with a dual concentration in Kodály and Orff Schulwerk. Andrew has served on the Organization of American Kodály Educators National Board, has done national committee work for the American Orff Schulwerk Association, and has held leadership positions in state and regional organizations for both Orff Schulwerk and Kodály. Andrew teaches in the Orff courses at the University of St. Thomas in St. Paul, Southern Methodist University in Dallas, and the University of Memphis, and he has also presented at both OAKE and AOSA national conferences. Before I get to my interview with Andrew, I wanted to talk a little bit more about advocating for your music classroom and your music program. In the last episode of the podcast, I talked about the many resources you can find and put to use on the AOSA website, which is aosa.org. I talked about the free downloadable resources, links to researched articles, videos to show, resources to give to parents and administrators, and a lot more. Before taping my interview with Andrew Ellingsen, I was chatting with him about his day and week at school, and he began to tell me about one of the things he does to advocate for his classroom, and I wanted to share those ideas with you as well. Andrew told me about how he shares small informances, which he calls kindergarten classroom concerts, with the parents of his students. What Andrew does is that he emails out to all of the parents and says, in this week or in this span of time, I'll be opening up my classroom for you to find a time to come in and see your student in music class. basically he gives them the times of kindergarten classes and says, here are 2 times when your students will be coming to music. Here's a Google sign up or an online sign up form. Choose one of the times to come in and to see your students in music. You can bring a grandparent, you can bring a neighbor, you can do whatever you want, but come in to see your students. And what he does with students in the classroom is basically show off to parents all the things that he does throughout the year. Students play xylophones and metallophones. They sing folk songs. They do their daily routine where they walk in and make a circle and sing, "Hello, Mr. E," and he sings, "Hello, Charlie," or "Hello, Juanita," or whatever. They sing back and forth. They do all of the things that they do every day in music class. But it's a very amazing experience for parents because they see their student moving. They see their student playing an instrument. They hear every single child in the class sing alone, which for kindergarten is a big deal. They see all of these things happening, and they can even participate in some ways. It's an eye-opening experience because even if you had parents come in for a concert where all the parents file into the gym and kids come out in costumes or whatever, that's not really an authentic way to see what really actually happens in a music classroom. And in some ways, it's not as exciting as if you were to actually see students doing what they do day in and day out. So Andrew sends out an online evite, and basically for each homeroom says there are 2 times available, choose one of the times, and he's able to get all parents or all adults who want to come in to see in either the first or the second time with that classroom. And he said that if there's a parent who just absolutely cannot make it during that week, he says, well, my door is always open. If there's another time that in the next few weeks that works better, please let me know. And you can come in on your own. It won't be quite as exciting as with all the other parents, but come right on in. He uses this opportunity sort of like an informant. So for the most part, parents come in and either stand or sit around the room. There are a few chairs for grandparents, but otherwise parents sit on the floors just sort of like students. He posts "I can" statements on his whiteboard behind everything that kindergartners don't really pay a lot of attention to, but the parents are excited that as they're going through, like as they're doing their hello song, they see the "I can" statement. I can sing alone and with others. And if as they're playing instruments, I can play alone, or I can play a steady beat, or I can do whatever. They can see what the goal is for the class, and then they can see their students actually doing it in real time. Andrew does take the time to point out to parents for some things, but does also just let the presentation run behind him, which he'll click through as he switches to new standards. Mostly what he wants parents to see is, yes, he wants them to see all their hitting all those standards and doing all of the things that, that we work really hard to teach kids, but he also wants parents to see students in the wild, in their classroom, enjoying and loving and singing and just having the best time making music, loving making music. He's found that this is important for grade level teachers, that they still call it a concert. He said, I don't really care what we call it, but for them, it's important he calls it a concert. So he calls it a classroom concert, and he's gotten really outstanding, amazing, positive feedback from parents. I wanted to share this with you not because Andrew's way is the only way, but I wanted to share it that any time that we can share with parents what we're doing in the classroom, whether it's through videos we send home or inviting them in for these little classroom concerts, or really just showing them what we do day in and day out through notes home or pictures or videos or whatever, it gives them a better understanding of what we really do and teaches them to care more about what we do. It's maybe some of the best advocacy that we can actually do, just showing them and making them really feel and experience that. So I just wanted to encourage you that, in the coming weeks or as you plan for the next year, think about how you can invite parents into the classroom, whether it's literally inviting them in, inviting them digitally through videos or things that you might post on a secure website. But just think about the ways that you can invite the community in to really see and connect. Andrew does it with one of his grade levels. You could maybe do it with 1 or 2, or even have a grade level performance and then also say, well, later in the year, I'm also during this week going to open up the classroom to parents of this specific grade to come in. Choose what works best for you, but think about the ways that you can connect with your community by inviting them to see what happens day in and day out in the music room. It will absolutely get great feedback from parents and administrators, but also it will help them feel more connected to you and also more connected to their students and how their students are amazing music makers. Andrew Ellingsen teaches elementary music and works as an instructional coach in Decorah, Iowa. He earned his Bachelor of Arts at Luther College and his Master of Arts in Music Education at the University of St. Thomas with a dual concentration in Kodály and Orff Schulwerk. He has served on the Organization of American Kodály Educators National Board, a committee for the American Orff Schulwerk Association, and has held leadership positions in state and regional organizations for both Orff Schulwerk and Kodály. Ellingsen teaches in the Orff courses at the University of St. Thomas in St. Paul, Southern Methodist University in Dallas, at the University of Memphis. He has also presented at both the Organization of American Kodály Educators and AOSA national conferences. Andrew, thanks so much for taking the time to talk with me today.
My pleasure to be here. It's good to talk to you.
Well, if you could give our listeners just a little bit of background, where do you teach, your grades and areas, and something fun about where you live?
I teach in the northeastern corner of Iowa in a town called Decorah. It's the hometown for Luther College, which is sort of Lutheran choral tradition homeland. Weston Noble was the choir director at Luther College for more than 50 years, and we have a really strong music community here in Decorah. It's a town of about 8,500 people, and I get to teach the kindergarten through second graders at John Klein Elementary here in Decorah. So I have about 100 students in each grade, split into 5 sections. So 5 classes of 20 kids each per grade. And I think the most unique thing about our town is probably the strong Norwegian heritage tradition here. We have the largest Norwegian American immigrant museum in the world. It's big enough that it has inside the museum a ship that sailed from Norway to America.
And it's a pretty cool ship, I will admit.
It is a pretty cool ship. It's hard to imagine crossing an ocean in it, but it's pretty great. You've gotten to see it because you've been here visiting your family before.
Yeah, so, okay, full disclosure, listeners. My sister actually teaches at Luther College. She's in the English department. And my brother-in-law is the exhibits director for the Norwegian American History Museum or Heritage Museum, the Vesterheim.
Vesterheim.org.
Yes.
Check it out.
And I have been behind the scenes at the Vesterheim. It's pretty exciting.
Ooh, I have not been behind the scenes. We need to make that a thing sometime.
Oh, absolutely. And that's the other thing is that my nephew will become Andrew's student in just a few years. So I'm
Really
very excited that he gets to be and both my nephews get to be your students in just a little bit of time.
Yay! It'll be great.
Well, Andrew, how did you become a part of the Orff community, or what drew you to Orff Schulwerk?
I was raised, I grew up in a family of music educators. I should start back at the beginning. My mom was elementary and middle school band. My dad was middle school and high school choir. So starting in 4th grade, I went to the Minnesota State Music Education Conference. And since then, I've only missed 5 maybe total where I haven't been able to be at the Minnesota Music Educators Association conference for even a day. And so I just grew up in a family that did music education. My parents met in recorder ensemble.
Oh my gosh, that's awesome.
Yep. So I'm a recorder baby. And then they discovered that they had this lovely child. I'm sure I was perfect in every way, which is absolutely not the truth. But they had this hyperactive little boy who needed an energy outlet and could not throw or catch a ball to save his soul. And they were brilliant enough in a small town where this wasn't what you did. They signed me up for tap and ballet at age 4. And so I had 14 years of dance training. And so when I decided to be a music teacher, I knew I wanted to do elementary. I had helped teach elementary dance classes. I had taught Sunday school classes. And so I was pretty strictly focused on doing elementary music education when that became clear that that was going to be my career path. After a few years in the classroom, I felt like I was doing really good work with kids, but I knew there was more that I could be doing. And a friend of mine was enrolled in Kodály and Orff levels at the University of St. Thomas and was just raving about them. And so I decided either I'm going to be the best music teacher I can be, or I'm going to do something else with my life. And so I signed up for Kodály 1 and Orff 1 and decided I would go back into my classroom after doing the first level of each approach. And if my first year back in the classroom didn't feel like the start of a new trajectory, I would look for an office job or look for a job in retail or something else, because I didn't want to be pretty good. I wanted to be what kids deserved in a music teacher. And I was lucky enough that the University of St. Thomas was in my backyard. And I got to study with Beth Nilsson and Cindy Hall and Jackie Schrader and Joella Hugg and Jay Broker and Michael Chandler. And really, truly, they changed who I was as a teacher, but they helped me grow into becoming a better version of myself, too.
Wow, that's so
They
cool.
they model such love and openness and compassion and the heart that they bring to the classroom, the true self that they bring to the classroom. I wanted to know how to do that for my students. And once you've seen that start to happen, once you've felt that magic inside of yourself, you can't not want to bring that to kids too.
Yeah. So did you continue on with your levels training after that level 1 experience?
I did. The following year, I applied for the entire grad program at the University of St. Thomas, and I was there in this little window when they were letting us do a dual concentration in Orff Schulwerk and Kodály. And so at the start of each summer, I would take my Kodály level. At the end of the summer, I took my Orff level. And in between, I had all my general music ed and elective credits as part of the master's degree. And so I had what was totally incredible and amazing, and I would never recommend for it to be the life approach for anybody, because it's a lot to do one level in a summer, and it's a lot to do two back to back. It took me a long time after I left the grad program and got back into my classroom to sort out what was authentically Kodály, what was authentically Orff, what was authentically both, and what's just authentically good teaching. And it's amazing to me how much of what I do in my classroom I feel like has a nod toward Orff or a nod toward Kodály, but really is just teaching kids in a way that meets kids where they are.
And I totally understand what you're saying, because I think about my own levels training, and I've only done Orff levels. I've not done Kodály, but my thought is, like when I did that training, I felt after the training like I know so much more, but it wasn't really until I tried it out with kids in the following school year that I really felt like I really had a handle on that knowledge. So I can't imagine like doing both levels without having taught kids in between to sort of really let that cement down. I would guess that you'd feel a lot of like, is this Kodály or is this Orff? Which level did I pull this from? Like where does that come from? But I bet you also did see a lot of those great interactions between both approaches.
I saw a lot of the great points of synchronicity between them, but I also, when I was teaching kids those first years, I wasn't necessarily even thinking, is this a Kodály activity? Is this an Orff activity? It was more just, what do the kids in front of me need to take the next step? And then a couple years in, with all three levels of both under my belt, it started being like, wait a minute. If I'm going to an Orff chapter share and I want to share something at an Orff chapter share, it needs to be something that's authentically Orff. Oh, which of the things that I'm doing feel unique and authentic to, oh, okay, I could do this thing. And that was when it started pulling itself apart into the, oh, this thing that worked for Johnny or Axel or Suzanne or whoever, that tended to be from this camp. And this thing that worked for Bridget or whoever else, oh, that tended to be from Orff. Okay, great, cool.
And I love that that's sort of how it worked out for you, because I feel like so often when people talk about Orff, or when they talk about Kodály, or when they talk about MLT, or they talk about Feierabend or whatever, they end up talking about the things that are different and the things that make them not just unique, but make them different and sort of, take a different road or different path to different things. And I think it's so cool that you got that training basically concurrently, and you were able to say, like, but this works here and this works here and this works here. I feel like if that were me, I would have said, like, I can't pit one against the other, because this is working for this kid and this is working for this kid, and all of it's sort of working for me together.
And that's exactly my experience. I will totally own up to the fact that I think every teacher in their classroom has a different experience in Orff and a different experience in Kodály and a different experience in any other training that they take, because there's so much of the self that comes to those trainings. I don't think any of the major approaches to elementary music education advocate for, here's a cookie cutter approach, go therefore and do as I say. I think it's much more discovering who you are as a teacher and what you believe is best for kids. But they share so much. They share the value of singing. They share the value of community music making. They share the value of deep understanding of musical concepts. They share the value of literacy. They share the value of creativity. They share so much. And then it's in the final finishing steerings of an activity where you can see sometimes, oh, okay, this person is a Kodály-inspired teacher, or, oh, okay, that person is an Orff-inspired teacher. Now, are there people in all of the camps of music education who do a terrible job? Sure, probably. But most people are doing a joyful job, a beautiful job of teaching children, and they're doing it sequentially, and they're doing it intentionally, and they're doing it playfully, and they're doing it creatively, and they're doing it in a way that helps kids find their own natural way of making music. And that all is shared among the approaches, to me.
Yeah, it's interesting when you think about the approaches sort of together, and you think about not like this is the Kodály way or this is the Orff way, but if you think about how different teachers have reacted to training, and it makes me wonder how much of our own personal bias goes into us saying, well, Orff is better because, or Kodály is better because, when really it might be like, I am more comfortable with Orff because of my experience or because the way it's worked in my classroom, or I am more comfortable with Kodály because even though something from Orff might work well for this many of your students, and something from Kodály or MLT or whatever might work well with many of your students, but like you personally are a lens which all of that is sort of filtered through.
I think that's very true. Because I think back on watching my friends in undergrad pick their major, and often as I think back on it, as they chose what major they wanted to do, it had less to do with this is the thing that I've been passionate about forever, and more to do with this person is amazing and I want to take as many classes as I can from that person. Mm-hmm. I want that role model to be what I'm growing into. And I think we all find those model teachers for ourselves, and we try to emulate them. And whether you find that in an Orff course or a Kodály course or a Dahlkros course or an MLT course or a Feierabend course, those things can't be denied when you feel that resonance with a person, when you feel that connection with, oh, they are bringing to life something that I have known was waiting, but I didn't know how to access. Of course you feel naturally drawn to that approach because that person represents that approach.
Yeah. I think you and I are both pedagogy nerds. I mean,
We are.
obviously,
it's a true statement.
If you've taken Orff and Kodály levels, I mean, I think that I like thinking about education and you like thinking about education. We could spend an hour or more talking about all the ways that, well, and I think a great takeaway for me already is that there is more that connects us than separates us. And
Absolutely.
So I think we could spend an hour talking about that. So,
and quite frankly, there are plenty of people to point out what's wrong with anything.
Right.
There are lots of people willing to take pot shots at music education. We don't need to do it to each other.
Right.
We need to celebrate the diversity of approaches that reach the diversity of kids that walk into our classroom.
Absolutely agree. I feel like there's, and I love talking about this is so similar to this, and this is so similar to this, and finding those strains where the approaches really are just good teaching. I've had that chat with other people in this podcast series of like, well, is this Orff or is it not? And it's like, it's just good teaching and it's integrated. That's why the Orff approach and the Kodály approach, and that's why they're so popular, because it's good teaching.
And when they were being developed, when those approaches were being developed, they were being developed by people looking at best practices across time, across place, looking for the tricks, the tips, the skills, the approaches that worked for kids. Neither Kodály nor Orff existed in a complete vacuum where these were lightning bolts of inspiration and no one had ever heard of anything like this before. I mean, they both were looking for things that worked and things they believed in and found ways to meld those together. You can't talk about Carl Orff without talking about the influence of Laban on the movement approaches. You can't talk about Kodály without noticing that the Kerwin hand symbols are named for somebody else. There are pieces of both approaches that were gathered together into what they believed to be, at the time, the most successful approach. And that's, to me, what we're charged to do as music educators today, is look at the best practices, look for the things that work in your classroom, emulate them, and take them to the next level.
Yeah, and I think that, two just sort of examples of that from both approaches. I know in the Orff world, the idea of take what works and use what works and expound upon that. In the Orff world, I know that Orff was sort of hesitant to publish the music for children, the volumes, because he didn't want people to take it and use it verbatim and say, like, this is the way. He wanted people to say, like, these are options. This is what we've done. Look at it and grow with it. And in the same sort of way, Kodály said, well, yeah, this is the sequence and these are the folk songs, but like, use folk songs from your country, make it work.
Analyze
for your
the tone
context.
set.
Yeah.
Analyze for the tone set, for the rhythmic content, for the everything that's native to the students that you're teaching.
And I think both of those are good examples because, like, the volumes in Orff are sort of held up as this, like, Bible in a way. And I feel like the folk songs that Kodály used were also sort of held up as, like, these are the songs. But in both cases, both people were saying, like, adapt it, let it grow, use it in a way that, it's not stagnant. I am not the voice. It's going to keep growing as our culture grows.
And I feel totally comfortable taking a piece from the volumes and looking for the 2-measure snippet in the bass line that I can turn into a bass part for something else that my kids are going to make themselves. And I feel totally comfortable looking at a Kodály sequence and looking for a folk song that isn't already sorted into it and adding to that. I think both of those things happen for me because I have the privilege of having taken training in both approaches at the same time and seen that There are people who believe deeply that this is the right way, that I respect from one camp, and people who believe deeply that that is the right way from another camp. And if I respect both of them and think that both are valid approaches, then it's up to me to take those and figure out what to do with them in my classroom.
Well, as an Orff sort of person, I'm going to say that I have ideas about Kodály, of what I think Kodály is, and I would love to ask you just a couple of things as someone who's been through Kodály training and also has seen the Orff world and Orff training. I'd just love to ask you a couple questions to sort of get an idea of how are they similar and what's a little different. And I think the biggest thing that I'd love to ask first is, I'm familiar with Orff teacher levels trainings and that basic process. And listeners to the podcast can go back and listen to my conversations with Tiffany English and Jennifer Donovan if they'd like to hear more about Orff levels and how all of that works. But I'm just curious, could you tell me about how Kodály training works and what sort of things you learn through that course?
Absolutely. I can speak to what my experience was, and
Right.
I can speak to what I hear from friends. I certainly can't speak to the universal, when you go have a training, this is the only thing that you will experience. So as long as everything I say is taken through that filter by the listeners, game on. I'm happy to speak that way. My experience with Kodály levels, there is a breakdown of the day in a similar way to the way that Orff levels is split into movement and recorder and ensemble or basic, or however your course frames it. The Kodály day is broken into things like folk song analysis, pedagogy, musicianship, choral rehearsal. But in the same way that in the Orff approach, those pieces all slowly meld together by the end, I think the goal for a Kodály approach is also that you're seeing different perspectives on the same core underlying values. The musicianship training in Kodály feels like next level college ear training, sort of, where you are really stretching yourself on how to sight sing, how to take a piece and analyze it in real time and use the skills that you have to make it musical and artistic, but also to demonstrate an understanding of the musical components within it. The pedagogy piece, to me, feels the most like an ensemble classroom in Orff courses, where it's sort of your homeroom. It's your touch point. It's where you're learning the kinds of things that happen with kids. The choral rehearsal is exactly what it says it is. It's a choral rehearsal, often working with a master conductor, sometimes working with student conductors also. And then the folk song analysis, I think, is really unique to Kodály in that you're looking at the folk songs of your current and future collection and analyzing them on a host of different criteria. What's the tone set? What are the motives melodically? What's the rhythmic set? What are the rhythmic motives? What's the tonality? What's the game type? What's the original culture that this came from? How would this song have been used by that culture? There's just so many things that you're analyzing for. And it's in the breaking down of folk music into those tiny, minute component pieces that you can start to see the connections between this folk song and that folk song and all these other folk songs, and slowly emerges the bigger picture of, oh, my folk song collection lends itself to be a So Me comes first in my curriculum because So Me happens so much in my folk song collection. Or the songs that I collected that I feel like are authentic to my kids, I'm going to do Mi Re Do first in my sequence because Mi Re Do happens so much all over the place in this folk song collection. And so your day is broken down into these various components, but they're all informing each other. I think what's interesting about a Kodály levels course also is that when you finish level 1, you have homework that's due before you can start level 2. You have to have X number of folk songs in your binder or in your online collection. You have to have video examples of yourself teaching using the material you learned in level 1 that you've submitted to your pedagogy teacher from level 1 before you can take level 2. And so I would say that feels different to me from Orff. Orff courses in general to me feel like you have the 2-week intensive experience in the summer, and then you go back to your classroom and you experiment with kids, and then you come back for level 2. Kodály courses feel more like you have the 2-week intensive, and then during the year, there's an expectation of work that's going to be completed before you come back for level 2.
So as you were talking, it was so interesting because I was hearing things that made me think about my levels training and how things were a little bit different and the structure is different. But overall, I feel like there are two basic things that jump out to me as being very similar. And one I think people would expect going into levels, and one they maybe wouldn't, either Kodály or Orff. And I think part of it is preparing you to be a better teacher, and partially through understanding the literature better or understanding students and the way they think better, or, just understanding more, you get better as a teacher. And I think the other big thing that both Orff and Kodály do is to not only push you to be a better teacher, but push you to be a better musician. And I remember in my recorder sessions, turning to someone next to me and going why are we doing this? I am never going to do this with students. This doesn't make any sense. But then it's but as I became better at the instrument, I learned the pitfalls and I learned the things that my students are going through, but also I just became better at it. And that makes me a better teacher when I am better at what I do. And I feel like that's
Absolutely.
True for both Orff and Kodály.
Yep. One of the folks I've gotten to study with in a master class for an Orff course after I was finished with my levels was Reinhold Wirsching. And at the time that I got to study with him, he was also teaching at the Orff Institute. And I'm not sure if he still is or not, but he was at the time. And his comment to our master class was, you are the only model your students will have. Be the best model you can be. Be the model that they deserve to have. And that really is major to me. If I'm going to teach a folk dance, I need to be able to model that dance artistically. If I'm going to teach a folk song, I need to be able to sing it beautifully. If I'm going to model a drumming piece, I need to be able to play artistically. Everything I do in my classroom, I need to assume that for some kid, I'm the only model they're going to see. And I need to bring my artistic best self, because that's the only thing they're going to have to emulate.
Yeah.
And I think that's true.
Such a charge.
It is a charge.
As a teacher.
But I think it's true of both Orff and Kodály courses. Not only is only the best rep good enough for our kids, only the best musicians are good enough for our kids. Only the best people are good enough for our kids. We need the best people and the best musicians to be the teachers of the youngest children, so that their first experience is artistic and joyful and spirited and community-based and active and engaging. It needs to be the very best of us who are working with the very youngest of us.
As someone who's been through Kodály and Orff training, would you say there are any common misconceptions about specifically Kodály training that you think Orff folks might have, or just general music people might have?
I do. I feel like in the same way that Orff teachers recognize in themselves the misconception that we're all barefoot and skipping through a prairie with hand chimes and scarves.
Yes.
We know that the best Orff teachers have a sequence to what they're doing. They're intentional about the order of things. They're intentional about the repertoire that they teach. And there are the artistic moments that maybe aren't necessarily directly tied to a specific concept, but overall, Orff teachers believe in helping kids move to deeper levels of understanding and deeper levels of expression. In the same way that the misconception about Orff teachers is maybe reinforced by a couple rare exceptions who are doing Orff in a way that doesn't feel right to those of us who feel like we're inspired to do the artistic, beautiful things. I think Kodály teachers have a bad rap of having a stick up their ass. I mean, I really believe that are there Kodály teachers out there who, by God, I'm going to teach this concept in this month of this grade because it's what I believe is the right thing, and whether the students are ready for it or not, we're going to move through my sequence? Sure. But they don't represent Kodály teachers. Kodály teachers are artistic and playful. They believe in a deep sense of independence in kids that is gained by the students developing a level of artistic and musical literacy where they can look at a piece of music and understand how it sounds because they can hear it in their head and they can sing it and they can take in the context clues to figure out what the artistic stylings would be. Kodály teachers believe kids should be making music in the same way Orff teachers believe it. Kodály teachers believe that kids should be able to create music using the material that they know. Kodály teachers believe that kids should be exposed to a broad range of music, and it's only through figuring out what this specific melodic concept is not that you figure out what this specific melodic concept is. It's hard to figure out the difference as a first grader between a step and a skip. Do to re is super different from do to mi. But it's also really important for kids to be singing songs in Dorian and Lydian and mixed meter and all of those things. So the thing that we're actually teaching as the concept has a context in, oh, I understand that thing. And it makes me want to understand all of these other things too. And I feel like Kodály teachers get the bad rap of being, I will sing only things that are exactly what I want to teach right now, and I will do it at my timeline, not the timeline of the kids. And I think that is, in the same way misconceptions are true of a few Orff teachers, I think there are a few Kodály teachers who represent the worst of what the Kodály approach can be, but I think the vast majority are artistic and active, beautiful music makers with kids.
Yeah, and it's so cool. It makes me think back to my conversation with Tiffany English just a few podcast episodes ago when she was talking about the Orff world, and she's like, there is not one way to use the Orff approach. There's not one teacher, and all people can use the Orff approach or can be part of the Orff community. And I think it's true, like, yes, there are some people who use Orff this way or use Kodály this way, but you're right that there are, it's mostly, we're all on a spectrum of some sort, and some people are more structured maybe in Kodály or less structured or whatever, but to base that off of where your students are at and what they need is the best way to approach it.
Yeah, I think the best of Kodály is a deep understanding of sequence and a deep understanding of helping kids move from known to unknown. That's present in Orff. I think the best of Orff is helping kids figure out how to take what they've learned and imitated and explored and improvise and create new things with it. And that's present in Kodály. It's just not necessarily what's emphasized as the stereotypical first take on what this approach is.
Well, one of the things that I have heard over and over when I'm talking with people about Kodály is this idea of structure, you know, structured curriculum or a structured teaching process. And, you know, if we're talking about Kodály, what is it about Kodály that gives us that idea of the structure and the process?
I think it's that Kodály teachers have analyzed the music that they're teaching so deeply that Kodály teachers generally have a deep belief that I've taught this thing really well and my students understand this concept deeply, and this thing is one click further on the spectrum. And so I believe that they're ready for that thing. And so I know that's where I want to take them. And that can feel overly structured, but I think it's authentically, for lots of people, coming from a place of, I understand what my students know, and I understand where I want to take them next.
Which is great. And is it, I mean, it's my understanding that in Kodály level that there is a heavy emphasis paid on structure and process, and you do this step and then you do this step next, and not because maybe that's the only way to do it, but because this is the way that in thousands of classrooms the process has worked the best to go from this to this to this. Is that a part of the Kodály training?
I would say that is certainly something that is modeled in some places, but I would also say I think that's something that's modeled in some places for Orff, where it's how do you teach this piece from the volumes? You do it this way. And I think what teacher educators are trying to do, and maybe sometimes don't always communicate, but really are well-intentioned, even if it doesn't come across that way, is this works in my classroom. And I'm super excited about this thing that I've done in my classroom, and it works. And I remember being so frustrated that I didn't know how to get kids to do this thing that I think is important. And I figured out a way that works for me. Maybe I learned it from somebody else. Maybe it's my original take on it, but I want to share it with you. And I think that in the same way that the Orff approach has the explore and imitate, moving into the improvise and create, Kodály has the approach of we move from unknown to known. We prepare a concept, and then we present the concept, and then we practice the concept. I don't think that either one of them needs to be rigid. I think generally people of one personality type might be drawn to one approach more than the other. But I think authentically, both are coming at it from a place of, here's stuff that works with kids. Try it in your classroom. If it works, great, use it. If this doesn't work when you're doing it, keep trying until you figure out a way that does. Because both approaches believe that kids should be artistic music makers. And whatever we need to do to get kids to be artistic music makers, we keep going until we figure that out.
Yeah. Well, another impression or idea that I have about Kodály, again, as someone who has not taken a Kodály level and doesn't have all the information, is that there is not a focus put on movement like there is in Orff levels, at least expressive movement. Is movement a part of the Kodály training, and in what ways?
I would say there's a bigger emphasis on folk movement than creative movement for sure in a Kodály course, in most Kodály courses. But I would say I think most Kodály teachers, when they're exploring high, middle, and low with kindergartners, they're doing the thing where when you hear a high sound, stand up. When you hear a low sound, squat down. It's maybe not make a beautiful pose that holds totally still at a high level until you can't hear the sound anymore, and make a low level shape that stretches as far as it can across the floor, that's modeled in an Orff movement course. But I think the kinesthetic learning that happens is absolutely tied into the Kodály approach. I think there's also a pretty big emphasis on folk music comes from a place and a people who have a purpose for it. And so if you are singing a song that originally had a dance with it or a singing game with it, that movement needs to accompany that song because that movement is authentically part of that song. And I love that that is true of Kodály educators, and that music and movement are so deeply entwined in an Orff course where the real belief is that music and movement can't be separated from each other. It's just in different ways. But there's absolutely a belief that movement is an important component of a child making music.
It's so funny as you were saying that, the talking about, folk songs and how if there was a movement or game that went along with it, you need to include that. I was like, wait, was that from his Kodály or his Orff? Because I feel like you're right that like both approaches believe that when you're talking about a context and a culture specifically, that music and movement are so tied together, and it's
right.
A cultural understanding, a good cultural understanding. If you're going to talk about the song, you should talk about the things that go with it and why it was influenced that way. And, giving a context to something helps you understand it a little better.
Music and movement are authentic ways that humans express themselves. And divorcing one from the other divorces the meaning from the music and movement making.
Right. Well, and it's, this is a totally another topic, but like when you're teaching kids music and you're teaching kids movement, you're actually also teaching them culture. I mean, we do have musical goals and motives and I can statements, till the world ends, but you're teaching culture and people as much as you're teaching music, and to divorce the movement from the music or vice versa or instruments or whatever, it's not a completely authentic approach.
Right. And I also want to say, I think most importantly, we're teaching kids to be in community with each other.
Right.
There's so much of our world that is everybody doing their own thing on their individual device. And I love that I teach in a school with one-to-one devices. There is great power in having kids be able to interact and send me a recording of themselves. I get way more out of that than a pencil and paper worksheet. But we are the place where it still takes 20 people working toward a common goal, everybody engaged in making music together, everybody listening to each other and matching to each other to have it be artistically satisfying. That doesn't happen almost any place in our culture anymore. And that's an important thing to have, an understanding of how powerful a group working together can be. And to me, honestly, if we're not teaching our kids to be better people and better community members, the music stuff kind of doesn't matter.
Absolutely. If you were to talk to someone who has taken no training whatsoever and wants to study both Orff and Kodály, I know you had a unique experience where you were able to sort of do them both at the same time, but how should people plan to do levels? Orff 1 and then next summer Kodály 1, or vice versa, or staggered, or should they try and squeeze them into one summer? What would you suggest?
My personal take would be, I think it makes sense to do Kodály 1 and Orff 1 in the same summer. I think having the first experience with both alongside each other and then going back into your classroom and trying out lots of things and seeing what feels more natural to you and what feels more successful to you and what feels more authentic to your teaching style, I think that's really powerful. That you're not making a decision that I feel like I belong to this camp or that camp until you've had information from both. Then, to me, it makes sense to finish the thing that feels like home. Finish the thing that helps you grow the most quickly into the most artistic teacher you can be. And then continue to stretch yourself, because there are going to be kids who what you've done the most work in isn't reaching yet. And you still need to grow your toolbox to be able to meet their needs. You're going to have a kid, if you run a super structured classroom, you're going to have a kid who needs free exploration space. You're going to have kids who, if you have lots of open-ended questions, needs there sometime to be a structure and a right and wrong. And I'm not saying that either approach hits one group of kids better than another, but I think we all know that even the very best teachers in our schools look at their classrooms and look at an individual kid and think, what else do I need to add to my toolbox to reach you better? And in the same way that classroom teachers do that, I think we need to do that. We need to grow our toolbox to incorporate enough tools that we can hit as many different learners as we possibly can.
I love that you took that approach to answering that question, because I think other people could answer it in different ways, but I love that you were saying basically, take both, live with them a little bit and decide what's working the best, because, and also don't discount one without understanding the other,
Right.
Because you're right. There are a lot of commonalities, but there are a lot of ways that if you use techniques from one or the other, you're going to hit different students and all their different learning needs. So I love that you talked about that. as I think practically, I know there are not a lot of places where there are Orff and Kodály levels close to one another that are moderately priced or whatever.
Right.
So I know that also is a factor as people are making decisions about what they want to do. But I think me personally, if I were to do it again, I might do Orff level 1 and Kodály level 1 as close to each other as I could, and then decide, like, do I want to keep going level 2 on one of them or both of them, because You're right, getting that perspective is so important.
I also think there is real power in going through a levels program in either approach with your cohort of peers. If you start level 1 and move on to level 2 and finish in level 3 with the same group, those are your people forever. Those are the people who went through everything with you. You know the training that they had, you know the experiences they had, you know the conversations they had. Those are the people you can call in tears when you tried a lesson that you were sure was going to be brilliant and it crashes and burns. You need that network of peers, because we don't have the 5th grade team where there's 6 teachers all teaching on the team together and we can walk to the classroom next door. We have the art teacher next door, and the art teacher's awesome, and they're also an island of their own style, but they're not doing exactly the same thing we're doing. And so you need to have that network of people. And so I feel like I was really lucky that I got my Orff support group and I got my Kodály support group, and we can have group therapy if we need to on whatever it is that's gone wrong in our classrooms, or celebrate the things that have gone right and share those ideas.
Yeah. Well, Andrew, I just have one more question for you, and I'll tell you, for all the other conversations in this series, the question has been, if you could tell music teachers out there one reason they should explore Orff Schulwerk, what would it be? But because I've had a lot of people answer that question, and because I think you have a really fascinating perspective, would you answer that as, if you could tell music teachers out there one reason they could explore Kodály, what would that be? I mean, if you can divorce, the two, I know you took them and they're so close together and you live both approaches, but if you could just say, for people who are maybe Orff inclined, what are great reasons, or why would you say Kodály is so valuable?
Yeah. I feel like Kodály taught me how to look at a piece of music and analyze it quickly and efficiently and know what place it was going to fill in my curriculum, where it was going to fit naturally, which kids were ready for it. It taught me to analyze and analyze and analyze. But it also taught me to have context for that analysis. It taught me to respect the folk song as something that was passed down through generations and hundreds and thousands and tens of thousands of mouths and minds and spirits, and arrives to us as a polished whole that comes from a time and a place and a group. I think I learned from Kodály how to respect a folk song. Now, honestly, I love the question of why should somebody take an Orff course also, because I feel like it was in the Orff course where I learned how to bring a playful spirit to my teaching. I learned how to be open to the possibility of what kids could change in my classroom. I learned to be willing to let go of what I thought was going to be happening in my classroom. And I learned to be ready to go on the ride of discovery with kids. It takes so much preparation to be ready to go in multiple directions based on the choices that kids make. But boy, when they start to understand that really, truly, you're ready to go on that journey with them, you're ready to validate their artistic impulses as valid and authentic and beautiful and worthy, there's such power in that for kids. And so, yeah. So I think Kodály courses have value, and I think Orff courses have value. Mostly, though, I think the reason to take any additional training above and beyond what we get in our undergrad is that our kids deserve the best. And there is not a single undergrad program in the country that I think would tell you they have enough hours to teach kids in their courses all of the things they need to know to be ready to be a fully successful teacher on the first day. And so it's up to us to fill in the holes. It's up to us to keep stretching ourselves, to be worthy of the responsibility of teaching our kids.
And as you were talking and I was thinking about levels training in Orff and Kodály, the one thing that I would say sort of as a follow-up is if you can't commit to the time of an Orff level or can't commit to the money of an Orff level, you can still find local chapters and local chapter workshops, and that community is there and they want you to come join. Orff chapters and Kodály chapters love meeting new people. So look in your area and find them.
I was just talking to a social studies teacher at our middle school, and he was asking about, like, when I leave on the weekend to go do a workshop, what is that? And I said, well, elementary music teachers don't usually have professional development brought in for them by their school district. Usually at the elementary level, PD is brought in for reading and math, because those are things that are hit on standardized tests. Sometimes it's on a new curriculum for one of the other areas. Sometimes it's on trauma or helping kids be safe or anti-bullying or something like that. It's usually not elementary music. And elementary music teachers have found ways to pool their resources together to bring in clinicians, and they spend their own money and they spend their own Saturdays to go be with a group of people who gets what it's like to be a music teacher and spends their weekend figuring out what's next in their classroom. So I totally agree that that is available and so important. His mind nearly melted. He was like, oh, I want that for social studies. I want a group of 7th grade social studies teachers to pool their resources together to bring in an expert from the Library of Congress to talk about source materials in the social studies curriculum, or to bring in a cultural expert talking about XYZ. And it's really special that elementary music teachers have access to this as a thing. And it's really important that we don't lose that.
Yeah. And it is worth the weekend time and the drive and the $25 or whatever a session to be a part of that community and get that great experience.
Because we know we're the island in our school. Right. We're the misfit. We need our network. We need the people who get it and can hold us up.
Well, Andrew Ellingsen, I really want to thank you for taking the time to talk with me about your experience with Orff Schulwerk and Kodály and sharing some of your expertise and insights. This has been a really great conversation. Thank you so much.
It's been an absolute pleasure, David.
Andrew Ellingsen teaches elementary music and works as an instructional coach in Decorah, Iowa. He has served on the Organization of American Kodály Educators National Board, has been involved with the American Orff Schulwerk Association at the state and national levels, and teaches in the Orff courses at the University of St. Thomas in St. Paul, Southern Methodist University in Dallas, and at the University of Memphis. If you have follow-up questions for Andrew, you can email him at amellingsen@gmail.com. That's all for this episode of the podcast, but check back in the coming weeks for more conversations with Orff specialists from around the country. If you're interested in learning more about Orff Schulwerk, finding a local Orff chapter, or attending Orff teacher training, you can find all the information you need at aosa.org. My name is David Rao, and you have been listening to Make Moments Matter, a music education podcast.